Okay, here we are into our next preserving project, and this is our first tomato project because you guessed it, tomatoes are ready in my garden. So we picked some fresh tomatoes yesterday, my husband picked them rather, and here they are. I've got a number of varieties that I'm going to go through in a moment, but today's recipe is pomodori pilati, as we say it in Italian, or just simply whole peeled canned tomatoes. Okay, so if you're only going to do one type of canned tomatoes, this is the one. And just simply because you give yourself more options when we can them whole in the jars peeled. Because then you can use them whole, you can chop them, or you could even puree them and make a passata or a pureed tomato from the whole ones. Okay, I've been doing this pretty much my entire life, so I'm going to share with you today all the tips that my mom, my grandma, my aunts all shared with me, also too on numerous trips to Italy when I've been there during tomato canning season. So just like usual, we're going to go through what I've got here. So I've got some fresh basil, and that is an absolute must. Okay, you cannot use dried basil for this. So it's in season as well. I picked this from my garden, or you can get it from the market. Okay, so I've got it here. We're going to be using the tender leaves only, not the thick stems. So we'll take those off as we need it. Then of course tomatoes. So in your recipe I've specified that my favorite varieties for canning are the San Marzano, which are these from my garden, or Romano. Okay, those are specifically produced for canning, and the reason is they're really fleshy, there's not a lot of seeds, and the skin comes off very easily. But of course I don't like to waste anything, and we have a number of varieties in my garden. So whenever I'm canning my tomatoes, if I have any other tomatoes kicking around that I think are not going to get eaten up before the next ones are ready, I will can them as well. So I've got some cocktails here that'll go in, and I also have some large, I guess they're probably like a beefsteak variety. This one here I've trimmed out for a bad bit, which I'll show you in a moment. But also these are great to can if you have them as well, because of course we don't want to waste. And isn't that the object of preserving? We want to preserve things. Our other equipment that we need, as usual, our jar lifter, our silicone tongs, our little magnet. I've got 6 wide mouth rims here because I'm going to use a 500 ml wide rim jars, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. I've got my 6 snap lids that I'll heat up as usual before I use those. And then you can probably hear the pot in the background. I'm sanitizing my jars. I left one out to show you. So I'm using the 500 ml wide mouth. And the reason I like to use these for this particular project is, the wide mouth. I'll either do a 500 or a 1 liter. I've put a small batch, my first batch from the garden, so that's why I'm going to do 500s. That way I can choose based on the recipe if I need a smaller amount or a larger amount. But I like to use the wide rim for the peeled whole tomatoes because if I do want to puree this in a pinch, my immersion blender will fit right in the wide mouth, and so I have less dirty dishes. So that's one of my little personalized tips I'm going to share with you. And I hate washing dishes just like the rest of you, so if I can avoid that, I will. So oftentimes when I'm finished my passata, if I'm down to just plum tomatoes and I want to make some pureed tomato or passata, I'll just put my immersion blender right in the 500 ml jar or the 1 liter jar, and less mess. So that's why I like to use the wide rim. I'm going to pop this in the pot so that this gets sanitized as well. So we're also going to need a couple of large bowls. So we've got one, I like to use stainless steel, just simple, won't break. I have one with my tomatoes, another one for our finished tomatoes once they're peeled. I also have a very large colander, okay? I also have a clean tea towel, a clean cotton tea towel that I'm going to line my colander with. And then I also like another tea towel here that I'm going to roll up like this, and I'll show you when we fill our jars. It's just nice to have a soft surface to kind of pat down our tomatoes. I'll demonstrate that as we go along. I also have here on my stove, I have a medium-sized to large pot. I have mine half filled with water, okay, and I've got a slotted spoon, okay, so that's going to be to blanch our tomatoes. And then off behind me is my canning pot, sanitizing my jars. You don't need to see that. Something else I have here today that you haven't seen yet is my pressure canner. I've got my pressure canner back here because, as stated in your recipe, you'll have to decide in terms of your tomatoes whether or not you would like to add citric acid or lemon juice. in order to make this a food safe preserving project. So basically, I'm just going to reiterate, although tomatoes are high acid, because there are different varieties, the government recommends that we add some citric acid or lemon juice if we're using the water bath canning method, okay? And that's because different varieties of tomatoes have different levels of acidity or pH balance, okay? For example, yellow tomatoes don't have as much acid in them as red tomatoes, okay? So basically, if you don't want to add any additives, like myself, such as citric acid or lemon juice, then in order for this to be a food-safe project, we need to use the pressure canner. So that's why I have my pressure canner out today, okay? So I'm gonna follow the manufacturer's instructions, and I'm going to can this according to those instructions, okay? Every pressure canner will be slightly different based on the size, also depending on where you're located and the altitude of the country or region that you have to be in, okay? So if you want to use just your regular water bath canner, which I'm sanitizing my jars in now and that we've used for a number of our other projects, then you will have to add at the very end before you put your lid on the jar. I'll remind you, you need to add your lemon juice or your citric acid as per the recipe based on the size of the jar, okay? And you can get the citric acid in any store that has canning supplies, or of course, if it's easier for you, just squeeze some lemons and you'll have your lemon juice, okay? So that's very, very important. And I think that's it for our equipment. So let's get started. First thing I'm gonna do is show you how I prepared these. So have a look and you'll see how we got to this stage. Step 1, fill up a sink with fresh, clean water, add your tomatoes, and wash them of any dirt or particles and place them in a clean bowl. Step 2, take each tomato and remove any bad bits. I know this one looks really bad, but we have watermarks on our tomatoes. So something like that can just come right out. And I'm going to share a little tip with you. Let's make sure there's no other bad marks on it. Use your nose, smell the tomato. If there's any detection whatsoever of a sour smell, continue to remove it until the smell is gone. And that's how you'll know whether or not it started to rot. In this case, there's no sour smell whatsoever. So I've just removed that bad bit and it's perfectly fine to go. Now the others, if there's no marks on them to remove, that looks fine. It's just normal. These are water marks. I'm not going to remove those. I'm going to leave those intact. Here's another one with a watermark. So same thing. I'm going to just cut that with a sharp knife. So we seem to get these water cracks in our tomatoes when we have a lot of sunshine. They get nice and ripe, and then we get a bunch of rain. And what happens is the tomatoes absorb that water really quickly, and they kind of burst. So all I'm going to do is smell that. There is no sour smell whatsoever, so that is perfectly fine. Okay, so that's how we avoid waste. We'll check these. These all look fine. That looks just like a mark on the bottom. Let's just check it. Oh, see, it wasn't. There was more, so let's remove that. And then that is ready to go. These others, those blemishes, that's totally fine. It's just on the surface, on the skin, so that's what we're looking for. This one here, this has a watermark. There's no smell whatsoever. I think it's fine, but I'm going to remove it anyways. It's when it starts to look like it's gone like black, like that one, that first one, that you really want to be concerned. No, that's perfectly fine. I just removed that blemish. These ones are all fine. So you can see the Romas, or the San Marzanos in this case, the long, slender ones, they tend to have less blemishes on them. That's why they're perfect for canning. These little cocktail ones are pretty good as well. It seems to be the larger eating style that have kind of popped out of their skin. I'll show you another one. So here's another one here that's popped out of his skin. So normally I would leave these for eating, but if I feel that they're not going to get eaten before they go bad, I will add them to my canning. So I'm going to remove that. Quick smell, smells perfectly fine. And in it goes. Okay, here we are at my stovetop, and I've got my pot of water. The water's come to a boil, but now I've turned it down to a simmer. I have my bowl of tomatoes that have been prepared, trimmed off any bad bits. You could core them ahead, or I've left the core in. I'm going to remove the core when I peel them, and I'll show you. So that's your own choice. I prefer to leave the core in here and then just remove any bad bits first, okay? And then I also have a large stainless steel bowl here with cold water, and that'll stop our tomatoes from cooking. Okay, so like I said, we're up at about low heat, just simmering in here. You can see the steam coming off that's come to a boil. So you're going to drop in, depending on the size, I might drop in like 6 or 8. These are smaller, so I could probably actually add a little bit more. Okay, and you're going to want to drop them in here only as long as you need to. And so basically, we just want to get the skin off. Okay, so let's drop them in for a couple of minutes, and then we'll test one, and we'll go from there. Okay, the one that is cut is probably our easiest one to check. Okay, the skin is coming off quite easily. I might pierce this one. Yeah, the skin is coming off really easily. So let's drop those in there, just to stop them from cooking, because we don't want to cook them at this point. We just want to blanch them so that we can remove that skin. Okay, so let's get our next ones in. Let's put this big one in. Let's put all the big ones in, because they'll take a little bit longer, just due to their size. I'll usually prepare enough tomatoes at this point to fill this large steel bowl. Then I'll head over, peel them, get them straining in my colander, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up the balance of these. Coming off easier, but still not as easy as we'd like. So let's leave them for another 30 seconds, and then we'll add them to the cold water so we can handle them. My bigger tomatoes are going to take longer. There we go. That's coming off nice and easy, so let's add those to the bowl. Let's do one more batch before we head over to the sink. This is the easiest method of canning tomatoes. If you ever have tomatoes that are on their way out, they're going to spoil, just do this, even if you only have 1 or 2 jars, and you'll be good to go. No one likes to waste any food, especially me. Okay, these are ready. So let's get them all out. We're going to keep our water on a low simmer just to keep it warm for the next batch. And let's move over to the sink. Okay, here we are at the sink. Now, our tomatoes that are cooled off, I've added to the sink so the water can strain. I have here a bowl with my compost, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each individual tomato, I'm going to remove the core, just easily, so you need a nice sharp paring knife, and the skin, and you can see how easily that skin comes off. Okay, you want to get all the skin, and again, if you find a blemish that you missed the first time around, you will remove it, but remember to smell it and make sure it's not sour. Any little bit of sour tomato or spoiled tomato will spoil the whole batch. Now what I'm doing is I'm squeezing it gently between my hands, and that's removing the seeds and some of that liquid. Okay, and then I'm going to add it now to my colander lined with the tea towel. Okay, and you're going to carry on. These Romas, it might be easier just to slip off the top like that. These ones peel very easily, as you'll see. Actually, these are San Marzanos, not Romas. Romas will peel as easily. Okay, and then these, you can see I'm just gently squeezing. Okay, any seeds, and in they go. So again, this is going to take a little bit of time, but it usually happens pretty quickly if you've submerged them in the boiling water for long enough. You can remove the core. If you have a nice thick white core like that, you can just remove that. And again, these ones are a little more delicate, these round ones, so I'm going to give it a gentle squeeze and then put the flesh in the bowl. So here's our large one. Now the ones that are really large like this, you may choose to cut that in half or in quarters, as it is quite large. The San Marzanos and the Romanos are just the perfect size. So this one here I'm going to cut in half, and I'm going to deal with it 1/2 at a time. And it will squirt you, so make sure you have an apron on. Okay, so in they go. Oh, and there's a piece of skin that I missed, so let's get that. Gently squeeze. Okay, so you want to get rid of that excess liquid and those seeds. Seeds are not going to add anything to your sauce. They'll take away from the flavor. They can sometimes even be a little bit bitter, the seeds, so you want to get rid of those. And that extra water we want to get rid of just from the get-go, and then with the squeeze, and then when we put it in the lined colander, that will continue to remove any excess water. So all you're left is the beautiful tomato flesh. You could always cut them in half or rip them in half as you fill the jars as well. Okay. Ideally, this is a 2-person job. If you're doing a lot of tomatoes, which I have in the past, if you have, bushels of tomato you're doing, it's wise to have 1 person on the pot to man the pot, heating the tomatoes. 1 person doing this job that I'm doing right now. And I'm going to remove this little yellow piece because it's just a little bit hard. So 1 person on this job. And then after our tomatoes have strained for at least a half hour, then to have someone filling the jars. So that's kind of how the operation would go if you were doing a lot. I do small batches at a time because I just do them as my tomatoes are ready in the garden. And just based on my schedule, I prefer to just do a batch like this when they're available. So I could probably do a batch this size probably in an hour or under an hour. I prepared 6 jars, but 6 of the 500 mils, but I don't think I'll probably get 6 out of this. It's really hard to guesstimate the yield on tomatoes. Tomatoes withhold a lot of water, okay? So depending on how much water the tomatoes themselves have, how much water you've squeezed out of them at this point, and how long you let them strain in the colander, all those variables will affect your yield, okay? So just like our passata, basically the more of this excess water that you remove that doesn't really contribute to your sauce, the thicker your sauce will be and the less time it will need to cook, because it won't have to cook down to evaporate or to reduce all the liquid or the water in your sauce. So if I had to say what the biggest tip here was, it would be the squeezing out the water and straining them here. That is something you don't want to miss. A lot of people omit those steps. And then basically you have some watery tomatoes in your jar, which are still fine to use, but they're going to take a lot longer to cook down and to reduce. So we want to get rid of the excess water that doesn't add anything to our sauce. They're not cooked at this point because we only blanch them for a minute. But when we process them in either the pressure canner or in the water bath, they will cook. So then when you use them, they will be cooked. They will be fully cooked. And if you've eliminated a lot of the water, it makes for a quicker dish in the end. So it's well worth spending the time doing that at this point, because of course if you don't remove the water, you're going to use more jars, and that will affect your pocketbook as well, because you'll use more jars, therefore more lids. So it's a bigger investment for you. So it's very worthwhile doing these steps. You'll produce a better product in the long run. So let's move on to our next step. Okay, I've added the last of the tomatoes here, and you can even give them a little push down to help facilitate that water straining out. And we'll let them sit now and strain away all the extra liquid. Okay, here we are. So our tomatoes have sat in the sink for about a half hour, and all that excess liquid has strained away. So now I have my wide mouth 500 ml mason jar here. I've got it on a tea towel that I've kind of folded up and made nice and thick. Especially my counter is granite here, so this is especially important to have a nice padding here for your jar. So with a wide mouth, I can actually add the tomatoes and my hand can fit right inside, and I can pack those down, which is what you want. You want to pack them down, you want to leave about a ½ inch of headspace. Okay, and then we're going to add just a basil leaf on the top as well. You can add the basil leaf at the bottom or the top as you wish. So how about this one? We'll add it on the top. Okay, we'll just press it down a little bit, and then we will wipe the jar as we normally do. Okay, so if I didn't have a wide mouth jar here and I couldn't get my hand in it, or maybe you have really large hands and you can't fit them in, a little trick is on this little padding that we have here is to cover your jar with your hand and just give it a little tap on there, and that'll move everything down, especially if you have a lid where you can't fit your hand inside. Okay, and you can see that it's filled in all the air pockets. It's moved everything down. Okay, I don't find it necessary to go in with my tool to remove the pockets with this, because I find that this little trick seems to compact them and get rid of any air packets. Okay, just want to make sure you have a nice cloth there to be safe that your jar doesn't crack. So our lids have been sanitized and boiled, so we will just add that. We'll add our ring, same as usual, just till it gives a little bit and fingertip tight, and that one's ready to go. I'm going to fill one more with you, and I'm going to show you, then I'm going to put the basil on the bottom this time. So it doesn't really matter. It's personal preference. So it will actually flavor the tomatoes in there. I do add fresh basil to my sauce, even though I have basil in here as well, because of course it'll take on the tomato flavor. It won't be as bright and fresh as fresh basil when we're actually making our sauce. Okay, so let me put that in, get our top, give it a little couple of taps. Okay, and that one actually is a little bit high, so let's remove a bit. Let's cut that tomato in half. And okay, so we want a nice 1/2 inch or so. And by now, you know, we've been canning all summer. By now, you kind of know your headspace. I don't need to use my tool for this. I've done this since I was, oh gosh, very, very young. Anyways, okay, so let's get our sanitized lid and wipe that. And there you have it. So that's 2. It looks like I'm probably going to get about 5 jars. Okay, so there you have it. We yielded 5 500 ml wide mouth jars with that scant basket of tomatoes this morning. So they're all filled, they're all ready to go, and now I'm going to process them. So I would like to reiterate that as I did not add any citric acid or lemon juice to mine, I'm going to need to use my pressure canner, and I'll just follow the manufacturer's directions to do that, because it depends on the altitude of the region you're in, as well as the size jars, etc. Okay, so you can just go to the manufacturer's directions. If you're using a water bath canning method, as we have for lots of our projects, then you will follow the time in your recipe to process those in your water bath with the addition of the citric acid or the lemon juice that's added right before we put the snap lid and the ring on the jar. Okay, so very important. I hope this inspires you to can some local tomatoes, because they're just wonderful this time of year, and you can preserve these to use throughout the fall and winter. Oftentimes I can enough that, you know, once I'm heading into June or July, I'm using up my last jars of tomatoes so that we can just start this process all over again. So have a great day and join us for the Q&A Saturday morning. Thank you. Bye-bye.